See you in the land of Mordor, death awaits you at the border. Pass on through the gates of fun, destroy the ring of...
Hey Middle-earth role-playing fans and Lord of the Rings fans in general, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at Halls of the Elven King. This is 8204 of the series. This was released in 1988. I bought this from Endless Adventure pretty much when it came out. Paid like $8 for this. It wasn't very expensive. It's a very thin book. Reminds me a lot like the Weathertop book, the Amon Soul book. And it came out before the Calenhad book, even though it's later in the series. So I was excited for this book. I actually wanted to see what it looked like inside. And now we get a chance, so let's check it out. So back down to the table we go. Looking at the cover art. It looks pretty cool. It's not Agnes McBride, obviously. You have the Forest River coming through. There's a bridge across it. And then you see the mound. That's the entrance to the Halls of the Elven King. To me, this looks more like a barrow that I've seen in Korea, like a king's tomb. In fact, it looks a lot like a king's tomb I saw in Korea, the way the doors are. So I don't think the doors of the Elven Halls are that shape. In fact, it also reminds me a lot like Aslan's How in Prince Caspian, that C.S. Lewis book. So there are some similarities there. Definitely looks like a tomb. Anyway, flipping it over, nothing on the inside cover. You get the table of contents. The cover art was by David and Elisa Martin. They seem to be the primary cover artists before Agnes McBride jumped on board. Introduction to the Fortress series, nothing big there. Conversion charts. Now they do give you a nice black and white map of the region, and it's the Halls of the Elven King in Elvish are called Arad Hirind. I think that's how you pronounce it. Gotta remember, when I read The Hobbit, I was only in grade 4. So whatever I decided to pronounce things, that was it back then. And then Lord of the Rings in grade 7. So pronunciation was already well ingrained by the time I started playing role-playing games and saw the movies. So you get the map, and it's the same map as this color one from the Mirkwood book. For some reason, the Mirkwood book did not include the Halls of the Elven King. Then you get a background including a passage from the Hobbit itself, a black and white map of our northwestern Middle-earth, and where the Thranduil's kingdom is in relation to Dol Guldur and Mirkwood. And then it talks about the history of the elves and the wars in Beleriand and the Second Age. So it does talk about how the elves are the Sylvan elves. They're the dark elves because they never beheld the light of the trees, except for the ruling class. So Thranduil is actually a gray elf, a Sindarin elf, because although he didn't see the light of the trees, he did see Thingol and Melian. Thingol had seen the light of the trees, and Melian, how you pronounce that, was a lesser angel. So it gives the story of the Nandor, and then it talks about Orofer, that would be Thranduil's father, and Legolas's grandfather. He did survive the catastrophe of Beleriand, and he had a hatred for the Noldor. He blamed the Noldor for the kinslaying at Aquilon and the sack of Menegroth, and the dwarves for their part in the first sack of Menegroth, which was the capital of Doriath. Now, during the War of the Last Alliance, Orofor did join his forces with those of the Noldor and Dunedain from Arnor, as well as Gondor. Now, if you read Unfinished Tales, he brought a vast host. So Orofer's contribution in terms of numbers was 1/4 of the host, over 40,000 warriors. So this is from all over his lands of Mirkwood, and probably the plains too, outwards. That's what MERP claims. I do know that in the Unfinished Tales it does mention that only 1/3 of the host ever came back, as the elves were not well armored and made rash decisions, or if charged prematurely and got himself killed. which meant Thranduil was now the leader of a much diminished people. Because elves do not replace their numbers quickly, they're very slow, and with the Third Age, the elven numbers diminished even more because most of them fled overseas. And it talks about Thranduil's kingdom and the rise and fall of Dol Guldur. Not going into a lot of details here. Goes into the Battle of Five Armies a little, and then Legolas, Gollum, and the Fellowship of the Ring. So Legolas is never mentioned in The Hobbit. You would think that Tolkien, after he did Lord of the Rings, he went back to The Hobbit and fixed the Gollum-Bilbo scene. So if you have an original Hobbit, then you know that Gollum just gives the ring to Bilbo after Bilbo wins the riddle game. But then Tolkien realized that the ring is going to be the evil thing, so he went back and changed that part of the story. So you know you have a first edition Hobbit if it has that original tale. So Legolas never got re-mentioned in The Hobbit. I assume he's there. He just doesn't say anything or have a role. Peter Jackson, unfortunately, gave him such a huge role in the movie. I was not happy with it. Alright, so then we go into Thranduil's army. Now this is what I was really looking forward to. The mentioning of the host. And it breaks it down into structure like Gwador, or brotherhoods. And the first one is the Penguador, the Brotherhood of the Bow. Most elves would be bowmen. It's their natural weapon, especially in the woodlands. It would be a much natural weapon. It is the largest of the brotherhoods and contains 1/3 of all the warriors. So in times of war, roughly 1/3 of the army is made up of bowmen. Then you have the Pelegwadar, which is the Brotherhood of the Axe. Now, in The Hobbit, you never hear of any elves wielding axes, nor do you do so in Lord of the Rings. The only reference I could ever find was in Unfinished Tales and the Silmarillion, where in the founding of Menegroth in Doriath, Thingol filled his armies full of axes, spears, and swords. So it is possible there are some axe-wielding elves, especially among the Sindarin minority. But I don't think they use them that much. They're not mentioned in the Battle of the Five Armies. There's no elven axemen running around. I can't even think of a named elf who wielded an axe. The closest I could think of would be Mablung the Heavy-Handed. I've seen some artwork online with him wielding a mace, but never an axe. So I think that's just a MERP creation, taking liberty from one book. Then we got the Egwador, or Brotherhood of the Spear. This makes more sense. In the Battle of the Five Armies, when the goblins first come and break through the thin line of resistance of men who are trying to slow down the vanguard, the goblins then gathered in the Vale. The elves unleashed a barrage of arrows, and then 1,000 elven spearmen came rushing down and crashed into them. And then later, the second elven assault, they were reinforced by more elves. So at least over 1,000 elven spearmen were at the Battle of the Five Armies. Then last you have the Magwador, the Brotherhood of the Sword. This makes more sense than the Axemen. Of course, all elves would have a primary weapon and a secondary weapon. With the bowmen and spearmen, they would have short swords or long daggers, knives, depending how you look at it. The swordsman would probably have a bow or a spear as their secondary weapon, or a knife. Not sure about the axemen. Then it goes on the strength of the army. At the peak of the War of the Last Alliance, the army of the Tawarwaith numbered nearly 30,000, considering they said 40,000 earlier. More than 10,000 served the Penguador, 7,000 fought in both the Pelegwador and the Egwador, and almost 6,000 filled the ranks of the Magwador. Losses in the war were catastrophic. The Pelegwador perished the last elf, so the axemen. The army suffered 20,000 deaths, and virtually all survivors were wounded. Thranduil was now king, but the Tawarwaith would never recover their former strength. Also helps to explain why they retreated to the northeastern corner of Mirkwood, giving up nearly half to the necromancer of Dol Guldur, and the other quarter was just left uninhabited. And it talks about formations. So you have formal battle in the open field and large-scale fighting in the dense forest. I think the elves did better in the forest than they would have in the open. They did well enough in the Battle of the Five Armies when fighting on the slopes, but once they were out in the open, they were less effective. Remember, Thorin charged the goblins and drove them back, but as he kept driving, his flanks became more open, because the elves and men also, and other dwarves also helped him, but they were stretching themselves too thin against a numerically superior force. So I think the elves didn't do as well as they would have had they stayed put on the slopes. And in the movie, you see Thranduil ready to abandon the men and dwarves and simply retreat back to the forest. But then Legolas kind of scolds him for that. It's almost like the same as when the elves of Lothlorien showed up at Helm's Deep. They made too much of Thranduil. Thranduil has so little lines in The Hobbit, it ain't funny. But the elves did excellent when they fought the forces of Gundabad and Dol Guldur out in the forest during the War of the Ring. Thranduil won his wars and was able to join with Celeborn and defeat the last forces of Dol Guldur down in the south. Alright, then you get dress, weapons, and equipment. Not going to go through that much of that. Then we got the King's Halls. It gives a tale of a man of Dale in the late Third Age. You could put this in the Fourth Age too. Taking a tour of the King's Halls. They did the same thing in the Moria book, where they had an elf take a tour of the Dwarven Smith's Halls. So now we're going to the view to the north of the hill, the ridge, the forest, the river, and the gate. Again, I'm not a big fan of that. It looks too much like a tomb I've seen in Korea. So it goes on with the tale. You have to read through it. It's interesting reading, but not necessarily for a review. And you have the layout of the front. You have the bridge, the river, the gate, the hill, stairs. It is highly defensible. If an enemy was to come, you could easily collapse the bridge, or hold the bridge as long as you could. Collapsing would probably be better. And then an enemy would have to fight up the stairs to get to the gate. So a battering ram is not going to work that well. Digging them out would be better. Now we go to the layouts, and this is what I liked. So 1 is the main entrance from the gate. 2 is a guard room. 3 are the stables. You have all these little side rooms. 9 is the Great Hall, and there is a throne in the middle of it. 10 A to D is the armories of each Gwador. 7, 8 are pantries. 4 doors built into the East Wall Company accommodate the great bustle to and from the Great Hall. So there's nothing special with those. So 13 A to D. Elsewhere about the main level are scattered various common rooms, dormitories, and barracks for use in time of need. So any guardsmen, anybody, sanctuary. The elves are supposed to be able to bring their people inside in times of danger. Alright, then we have a cutaway of what this thing's supposed to look like if you were to cut the hill away. You can see here the little passage from the river. So this must be a really big hill. Not quite a mountain. And it's all treed on one side. So we got a picture of the Great Hall, and there's Thranduil's throne. And of course the pillars are made into like trees. I like that. And you have all the various entryways. And we have the open entry hall with the small guard room and the barracks. And the foundry with the armories for all of them. You get a blacksmith shop, and then you go to the upper level. So going up a staircase, you go to the upper level. My map is falling apart here. So pretty basic stuff. 15 A and B are feast halls. 17 A to S are numerous apartments of Thranduil's courtiers, their families, and their servants. 19 A to G are spread the king's chambers, and those of his queen, his son, his personal attendants, and his bodyguard. Never mentions who Thranduil's queen is, and if she's still alive, or if Legolas has more than... Is it just him, or does he have brothers and sisters? 20 is a library. 21 A to D is storage containing extra lamps. So, okay, so stuff you need to run a place. And then you have the Great Feast Hall. What it looks like. Typical kitchen or pantry. Some apartments for elves to sleep in. And the king's chamber as well. Alright. Then it goes down to the lower level. So it's only showing 3 levels here so far. You have the tanning hall is 22. 22B to D are storage closets for tools, dyes, and other items. 23A to C is an apothecary's hall. 24A to C is the weaving hall, which would make sense. 25 is a pottery hall. So this is like the workshops of these people. Sorry, 27 and 35 are like a treasury room, which has lots of stuff in it. 28 is a wood shop. 29 A to C is the hall of the masons. 30 A to N are the cells, which once housed 13 dwarves. There's a jewel halls and other fun stuff. Then you get the cellar, the very basement. So in the root cellar, as it's called, there's a wine cellar, the great storeroom, and it has the big trap door in it. So for where Bilbo got 13 dwarves out of a prison. Then you come to the cave just above the gurgling hill stream. Inside device which raises or lowers the portcullis that blocks entry into the hill at this point. You meet Galion, the elf who got drunk, with his buddy, the captain of the guard. I'm surprised he probably got demoted after this, or they never even found out how they got away, probably. So there's storerooms down there filled with stuff. And then you have the end of the tale. So that's kind of cool how you have the actual room that Bilbo escaped from down here. And then the portcullis that controls the entrance to the river. And it gives a close room of the portcullis room. Then it talks about adventurers. Now these adventurers were kind of weak as hell. A sorcerer in Thranduil's Hall around 1450. Highly unlikely. An Angmar spy would be able to get there. The Dragon's Eye, 2951, something about after the Battle of Five Armies. And some thieves some Easterlings disguised as thieves come in trying to steal this thing from Thranduil. You got the Elves Prisoner in 1318. This is like a golem, and you want to find out what about him. That's more a possibility, but I think than anything else I've read so far. And then the Fourth Age, a Dorwinion agent coming in. Then they have other adventures you could try for the mid-Third Age, the late Third Age, and the Fourth Age. I'm not going to go through all these little adventures. We never played any of these adventures. The Halls of the Elven King is a place you're not going to adventure in. Unless you're Bilbo, who had a magic ring and was able to sneak around, and even he almost got caught on occasion. You're not going to be wandering around stuff. These elves are all loyal to Thranduil, and it's just not possible to adventure within the fortress itself. Now you use this as a stopover. Either you get taken captive by elves and then you bargain for your freedom by doing something for Thranduil, or you're allowed to come in and spend the night and rest before going off somewhere else. That's about the only thing. Militarily, you can have the elven army defending the keep against the hordes of Gundabad and Dol Guldur. Maybe the Easterlings, after they defeated the army of King Brand and Dane Ironfoot, instead of besieging the Iron Mountain, they actually sent a force against Thranduil. It's possible, but you could do that and try and defend the fortress, which should be pretty easy, actually. Then it goes into tree forts, the typical tree forts. So all across Thranduil's borders, he would have these little tree forts. It makes perfect sense. Lothlorien had the same thing. Flets, or talons. And he gives you a typical sylvan tree fort. Trees that are specifically grown together, close together, and their interlocking boughs make a little shelter for people. So I have the ground level, the lower level, or the upper level, and then the roof. Hard to spot, so it's good hiding places. And then we go to a master garrison table, so you have an idea what the level of all these people are. The king and his retainers are all Sinda. The King's Guard are all Sylvan. The Hall's garrisons are all Sylvan. And they're all very Sylvanized. Alright, so that was a look at the Halls of the Elven King. What I think of this book, I liked it. But I can't find a use for it in any normal campaign setting that would involve this book in Middle-earth. Simply because you're not going to break into the halls of the Elven King unless you're like Bilbo with the magic ring. There's just no possible way. The adventures were very weak inside this book, but I love the layouts. You could transport this somewhere else in Middle-earth and make it into another thing. It could be a smaller elven home. It could be a dwarven hall that's just starting to be built. It could be an abandoned hall that you find and take over. There might be a dragon inside. There's the possibilities are endless. But as far as doing this in Mirkwood with Thranduil, just wasn't going to work. It's more of a stopover place if you get lost in the forest and the elves are feeling friendly. Or if they're not friendly, you're going to end up in the dungeon. And maybe you have to do something for Thranduil to get out. In a military campaign, you could try a siege. Let's say the forces of Dol Guldur and Gundabad succeed during the War of the Ring. You can easily... the elves could retreat back to the halls of the Elven King, which is supposed to be their refuge in the event of war. And see what happens there. Or maybe Smaug descends on it and tries to break through. Don't think he could have. Elves are a little tougher to defeat than dwarves. Thranduil is a very old elf. So it's a quite interesting read. I do enjoy it. Practicality-wise, it was another different topic, but I'm glad they went through this. I wish they had did Erebor as a fortress series. Or even the Iron Hills. Gone a little more in depth in the Iron Hills. I know they mentioned it in the Mirkwood book, but they could have did a deeper dive into the Iron Hills. And into Erebor especially. But anyway, that's my look at the Halls of the Elven King. All you Middle-earth role-playing fans, let me know what you guys thought if you had it and if you got to play it. And until next time, I'm Roman Daisel. I am out of here.